Thank you so much for taking out the time to speak to us today.
It's a pleasure.
I first met you in Bangalore when you were heading the India office of Upaya Social Ventures. Of course, I was then working at FSG, a social impact consulting firm, but I still remember being fascinated by your work at Upaya, where you invested in early stage enterprises to create dignified jobs for the poor. But a closer look now reveals that most of your career has been focused on using innovation and market to create impact, if I'm correct. Like you definitely focused on it through Paya, but also as the enterprise development manager at the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, the head of Ennovent and Innovation Accelerator, and the India director of Pepal that facilitated partnerships between the private and nonprofit sectors. So clearly, Amit, you've had such a diverse and interesting experience. So I think it'd be great to start the interview by hearing about your journey in your own words.
Thanks, Ria, and thanks for the opportunity to just share my career journey. I mean, from our discussion, this is primarily for young people who want to get into the sector. So I'll try and give context, around that. On the question of how I got into the sector, I think, like most people, I was very keen on working. Well, not the social sector or something, but working in a job that can create an impact. And my knowledge of the social sector was extremely vague. From an educational point of view, I graduated in mechanical engineering. By the time I graduated, I was quite sure that I would not make the best engineer. So I had to find alternative careers. And I got lucky and became a headhunter of all the things. And it was a fantastic experience. Moved from Bangalore, where I did my engineering, to Mumbai. Got to do what is known as executives, which is usually, typical headhunting at the CXO level. So, as a fresh graduate, getting a chance to, talk to some of the sector leaders was, an experience, right? And when you met with these leaders, you needed to do a lot of research. And I was lucky in the sense the first job that I had was across sectors. So, I had to research everything from, the film industry, entertainment industry, cement, to financial sector. So, to be able to sit in across. But I always wanted to, work in a role that actually creates impact on the ground. And I got lucky in the sense, a very close friend of mine, Suraj Sudhakar, who now a social enterprise known as Cool Coach. He was doing his Acumen Fellowship, and he introduced me to this startup that was looking at providing emergency service. So if you think about emergency service in India, about 15 odd years ago, there was none. You called an ambulance when somebody died. When we were in school, we were taught 101 is the ambulance number, if I remember right, or 102. 100 was police, and none of those numbers worked.
Yes.
So this company was trying to make a difference, by having this a professionally run emergency service with a 4-digit number 1298 that people could dial and actually get access to an ambulance with equipment and a professional staff. I found that extremely interesting. And what was even more interesting was this was a for-profit company. So, somebody who had very little knowledge about social sector, my idea of social sector was not-for-profits, running orphanages, running NGOs that work with poor kids. That's sort of the picture that I had. This was sort of an introduction to social enterprises, right? To use business to create impact. And I got very lucky in the sense I really connected with the founders. So I was an engineer who was doing headhunting for about 2.5 years, about 3 years. And the role that I was applying for was marketing and communication, which I had absolutely no skills or experience. But luckily, it was a startup. I really connected with the founders and I got the job. So that was literally how I got into the development of the social sector.
Wow, that's really interesting, Amit, especially because I feel a lot of people enter this space because like after graduating, they do a fellowship and that's how they get introduced to the sector, or they work at an NGO. And then like that's the entry, and through the fellowship network, they're able to discover jobs in the sector. So what's intriguing about your experience
Yeah.
is that like you started with a social enterprise and you didn't do a fellowship per se to get introduced to or to get into the sector and find opportunities within it, but you still used a network, like your friend helped you get that job. So it wasn't something
Yeah.
that came across you on its own.
Yeah. So at least, in 2006 or 8, I think that's when I joined Ziqitza Healthcare. There wasn't that many fellowship programs, right? There wasn't that much information about careers or opportunities in the development sector. So, but that's changed significantly now. There is a lot of information. My advice to young people who wanted to get into the sector, especially students, is do internships. Internship is an excellent way to get to know an organization, what they do, get an idea, at least some sense in terms of what a sector looks like. Be it the not-for-profit sector, be it impact investing, be it research, impact assessment, consultancy. There are enough internship opportunities. I think that's where a good place to start off. Whereas for young professionals, I think it's about taking a jump of faith, right? That's what I did. I got lucky, I would say, but it was clearly a jump of faith with a startup. And then from there, I've absolutely had a fun and fulfilling career.
Was there any particular reason why you were keen to enter the development sector? Like I know, like a lot of people, like I said earlier, work with an NGO, and that's how they feel that this work is so fulfilling and they'd like to do it more if possible. So did anything specific happen to you that sort of made you realize that you want to work in this space?
Not, I wouldn't say there was like a light bulb or an Apple moment. I would say from school itself, I was very keen of getting into the social sector, or at least working in what was different from a corporate job. Let me put it that way. But if you ask me 15 years ago, I had no idea. So what I'm also trying to say is for young people, it's fine if you're clueless. Look out, read up, talk to people. Get as much information as you can. And sometimes it just means that you get as much information and take that jump of faith. But I think what's interesting is there is a lot more people who are wanting to get into the sector. I think it's about really thinking through, what is the kind of organization or cause that you relate to. I think that's a good starting point. You can do a bit of research, find out organizations, and then it's about doing a bit of soul searching, right? Understanding what might be your basic skill sets and trying to link that for your first job in the social sector. Maybe I diverged a bit from your question, but I'm trying to frame my answers to suit the listener.
You're completely correct in pointing out how, asking yourself what you want to focus on, doing research is very useful. And maybe as you talk about your journey after Ziqitza, am I saying that name right?
Yes.
Yes, so your journey after Ziqitza and how you decided to, like, what you did afterwards and how you decided to do that particular, perform that particular role, take that particular job will be useful in helping the listeners figure out how they could potentially also plan their journey, right? What questions to ask themselves as they think about
Mhm.
what role to embark on next. So I think we're
Yeah,
going into the correct. It's a great transition.
perfect. Yeah, so yeah, the first thing is that first break, right? That's usually the biggest challenge. Once you are able to figure that out, so in my case, my first break was with Ziqitza Healthcare. And I was very lucky in the sense it was a startup. Within about 2.5 years, when I joined, the organization was running ambulances. By the time I quit, it had grown to potentially looking at running 450 ambulances. So massive scale. I was part of the core team, got to do everything from, started marketing and communication, did business development, spent 6 months in Patna doing operations, uh, had to do government contracts. So, got my hands dirty, worked. What I remember with Ziqitza was it was 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. And the way I decided to transition was, after 2.5 years, it reached a point where I know that I needed to upskill myself, grow in a role, which is when I decided to do an MBA. So I went to the US for a year. The good thing when I went for my MBA was I was very clear because I had formed a sense that I want to work in the development sector. I'd come to know about what I call the social enterprise sector, which is the for-profit companies. I wanted to work on the not-for-profit side now because that basic exposure gave me an understanding that there's a huge universe known as the not-for-profit sector that operates in India. I got lucky, moved to a role with a Tamil Nadu-based NGO known as Palmera Workers Development Society. It was, I think, a 40-year-old NGO that had built a network across Tamil Nadu. They wanted to bring in somebody to build out sort of a model where they bring corporates and NGOs together. And we had, so mine was sort of a dual role where the whole, we were running a program where we brought corporates and NGOs together. So a UK-based NGO called People was running the program, whereas all the on-ground support was given by the Tamil Nadu NGO. This experience gave me a much bigger sense of understanding of the not-for-profit world. And the not-for-profit world works very, very different from the for-profit social enterprise world. Lot of, and during that course, I also got to run a program that looked at micro entrepreneurships. So the idea was to set up micro entrepreneurs who will be part of sort of the shared service value we were creating with NGOs and corporates. That's when I got interested in entrepreneurship. And I think I can say that now because I've reflected on this is what I started realizing were there are things in my career that I would feel passionate about. So for me, entrepreneurship was that. And social entrepreneurship, for example, you will see in my career that I started focusing on. But entrepreneurship, trying to solve market challenges, right? Bringing innovation or trying to address a social issue. So, that's how from sort of the PWDS and people role that I moved to Ennovent. Ennovent is an intermediary organization that works with very early stage social enterprises, and they wanted somebody to come up and help build their startup vertical. So this was an opportunity to work with with set of early stage social entrepreneurs, helping them build their financial model, their business plan, connecting them to investors. Again, fantastic opportunity. This is when I really started realizing that I really like working with entrepreneurs, working with social entrepreneurs, because they are 110% driven by passion. They want to make a difference, and I was deriving energy by just working with them. So, when you think about your careers very early on, try and identify what really brings that passion in you, right? Yeah, and from there, moved to the Alliance, which was again working with entrepreneurs in a global role. We provided grant funds, especially with a focus on the clean cooking sector. And then from there to Upaya, where we were funding early stage entrepreneurs. So yeah, so that's sort of been my career progression. And then I would say what has helped me is to identify, what really drives me. From there, it's always, have some kind of a sense in terms of where you want your career to go. I know a lot of people who tend to be very comfortable in a role. For me, as an individual, I like challenges. And when I'm able to solve a challenge, I want another challenge. And that's sort of what's happened in my career as well. Like when I've achieved what I set out to is when, I look for a transition.
All very, very relevant advice, Amit. Like, get in, break into the space, gain an understanding, general understanding of the sector, like what you did, work for a social enterprise, then work for a nonprofit just to get an overall sense of the space, and then like try and figure out, use these experiences to understand what you like, what excites you, what drives you. And I know like there are some events or some, not events, like fellowships of sorts out there. Like I know there's this India Jam fellowship that's meant to help people in the social sector like reflect on what they've been doing and what they want to do going forward. Or you could do it alone, just like take some time out for reflection and use that to sort of create a journey going forward. So what's interesting about this, Amit, is like I love the emphasis on passion and drive, but I also wonder, like, when you created your own journey, like how did you think about the other practical elements? So for instance, as a young professional in the space myself, right, I've heard of people saying, hey, like get into the mainstream sector and focus on building your skills, because that's where, that's where you're going to grow the most, because development sector is kind of unstructured, and then enter the space, or even salaries for that matter, like especially when you talk about working in the nonprofit sector. And if you need to support your family or support yourself for that matter, so how do you manage these practical elements? And like, how does it weigh in with the balance, with the passion? So any thoughts on that side? How did you figure it out?
To answer that, let's start with the structure part, right? I think over the course of time, in the last 10 years or so, there has been a lot more structure in the development sector, I would say, compared to what it was. It's not as developed as the for-profit corporate sector. So, for example, if you are a computer engineer, these are your opportunities. If you specialize in certain languages or coding, okay, I have limited knowledge about this, but yeah, what the kind of jobs you can get, and from there, what your career progression can be. That kind of structure is still quite vague in the development sector, right? Which is why I think your first getting that break is important. I'm not the one to endorse that work in the corporate sector and then move to the social sector. If you're passionate about working in the social sector, break into it, get a job, do an internship. I know for a fact that there are enough opportunities and there is a lack of good talent in the sector. So I don't think opportunity is the issue. I think it's finding the right fitment. That's the bigger challenge. Within that, from my perspective, what has helped me is to be always on the lookout for what could be the next opportunity for me. So by the time, for example, when I was I really now wanted to work with entrepreneurs, right? Um, I was always looking out in the sense I would apply for the job listing sites just to keep a lookout in terms of what are opportunities out there. If I saw an organization that I knew that um, resonated with the kind of work that I would want to do, I would look at if they have openings. I might not be actively looking out for a job, but let's say if there is a role that looked interesting to me that would be I would look at what is the skill set they're looking for, right? What that helps is then you plan ahead. So what I'm trying to say in short is always plan ahead. It takes time for you to figure that out, which is why I go back to saying you need to do a lot of self-reflection. At least have a sense in terms of what you're interested in doing. That then helps you with the planning, which is where the structure, you at least form some kind of a structure in terms of how you can build a career. Coming to salaries, yeah, this is always a challenge, right? I remember, 2-3 years into the sector, salaries were compared to what my friends in the corporate sector were earning a pittance. I would say things have improved, especially in the for-profit social enterprise sector. Impact investment firms generally pay better, but nothing compared to the corporate sector. I think somewhere you will have to find that balance between having a fulfilling job and creating impact and being able to give up on salary. But there are enough opportunities within the social sector that pay reasonably well. Again, it might not be the same level as what you would earn. Let's say if I compare working for an impact measurement or assessment firm versus a EY or a KPMG. But what I can guarantee is you will have better work time, a better work culture, hopefully, and a work-life balance as compared to working in the corporate sector. So your level of frustration, at least from my experience, what I've seen with my friends and colleagues who are in the development sector, they seem to be a lot more happier generally in life. So that doesn't really answer the question on salaries, but at least it gives you a sense, as you face that issue or challenge, how to really think about it.
Yes. And are there any specific roles or jobs that you think tend to pay better than others?
I wouldn't say so. So we work for an international NGO, for example. Pay usually is much better than an Indian NGO. That's a given. The impact investing space pays better than working for a early stage social enterprise, right? So, these are some of the roles that pay better. That also means that the number of opportunities that are available is significantly lesser. The way I think about salaries is making yourself valuable. And there are two ways to think about this. One is, based on what your passion and your strengths lie, you can, one, specialize in something, right? Let's say you like communication, right? There are a lot of opportunities for communication in the development sector. So you start building your expertise around that. You could just be the best at digital marketing. What that does is then you are able to get paid for what you're worth. And there will be organizations that are willing to pay for that. So specialization is one way to go about it in terms of thinking a higher salary as you progress in your career. The other way is being a jack of all trades. So I will be honest and say that I am more of a jack of all trades person. And the way then to think about it is how do you go higher in a management career, right? So if you see my progression, I've been moving up from being a manager to my last role as a country director, right? So then you build your skill sets again, being able to manage a team, being able to network. So there are certain skill sets that you can acquire where you can still be a jack of all trades, build your managerial skills more than anything, than specializing in a very specific area. So that's the other way to go up, in the hierarchy, and thereby being able to get a better salary. Yeah.
Makes sense. Yes. Amit, you also mentioned this one point earlier that I'd like to go deeper into. So you spoke about how the development sector has grown more structured over the last couple of years. So uh, overall, like you've been in the development sector for many years now, almost uh, about a decade or more. So how have you seen the space grow in the last decade? What developments do you appreciate the most, or is there anything you would like to see the space evolve anywhere? You would like to see the space evolve going forward?
So I'll answer this question from a career point of view when you're thinking about the development sector and how it's evolved. I would say if you look 30 years ago, the development sector was purely the not-for-profit space. If you wanted to get into the development sector, education point of view, you did a master's in social work, something on those lines, and you worked for an NGO. You got in as an associate, a program associate, a program coordinator, moved up, became a program manager, or the other side was just fundraising, which is, again, it's only recently that those kind of opportunities have come. But 30 years ago, that was career opportunities in the development space. If you look at now, and this is purely my framing or the way I frame it, there is still the development sector, which is the not-for-profits. That has also evolved in the sense there are organizations that are providing, consultancy work, for example. There are organizations that are doing just impact measurement within the development space. There are implementing agencies that work on the ground. There are organizations that just purely help with fundraising. So, depending on what the needs have been within sort of the not-for-profit space, there are different sort of subsectors, if I may call it, that evolving, right? And within the implementing agencies, you have different sectors or thematic areas that they focus. Some of them can focus on women and children, other could be education, or it could be around health challenges, different thematic areas. So for me, that's one part of it. The other space is, as I said, the social enterprise space, right? There are a lot more startups. There are companies that I wouldn't call startups anymore. Ziqitza Healthcare is a good example of a social enterprise that has scaled massively. So there are for-profit companies that are creating social. Then there are intermediary organizations, incubators, accelerators, will grow social alpha that are providing support. There is the impact investing space that are looking at funding these social enterprises. Then there's the whole research organization that work both in the not-for-profit and the social enterprise side. So you are seeing sort of, for me, at least in my mind, kind of structures in terms of different sets of organizations that are working with sort of specialization, and within them sort of roles evolving. So that's how I see how things have evolved significantly. Even if you look at it from, things like fellowships is another example, right? Look at the educational side. You have short-term courses, you have long-term courses, you have masters in social enterprise. There are multiple programs, academic programs also that have come up that are geared to help you build a career in the social sector. So, yeah. That's at least in my mind, sort of the sense of evolution that I've seen.
Okay, so overall, I think what you there have been, you feel that there has been a growth in the opportunities, the type of opportunities, both educational and professional, into the development space in the last decade. And do you have any thoughts on how you would like to see the space evolve going forward?
Yeah, from a career point of view, I think there there is still work in terms of more standardization of roles. I think it's slowly coming into being, um, but it will take a lot longer. Um, so you can see standardization in terms of impact assessment, right, or social impact measurement. There are more standards in terms of what is measured and how you measure it. Based on that, so I'm linking it to careers. There are skill sets that you can build, right? Beyond that, I think where there is a lot more need within the sector is for people within the sector being open to, you know, um, hiring people who might not be a direct match to the skill set. I don't know if I'm answering your question the way you are thinking about, but what I see is a lot of applications get rejected simply because there isn't a direct fit. So if, you know, a lot of organizations, if they're hiring a communication person, even if it's a fresher, will not look at somebody from an engineering background, right? No matter how, you know, maybe that person is really talented. So for me, I think the sector needs to be more open when it comes to recruiting, be open to interviewing more people and testing it out. That's one change that I would like to see.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's exactly what I was looking for, Amit. Like focusing on the careers aspect. So good to know that, like you feel that there needs to be an increased focus on being flexible in terms of hiring, and standardization across roles is something that I personally have also been quite peeved with. Okay, so I'm conscious of the time. So how about we conclude by just having your parting thoughts or like words of advice for our listeners?
So it's become sexy to work in the social sector, or at least tell people you work in the social sector. My advice to people who want to move or look at the sector, you know, be realistic. One thing that I have always looked at when I hire people is empathy. Uh, it's it's something that cannot be seen in a resume. It's something that you, at least I try and test out while I do interviews. But for me, people who want to work in the social sector needs to reflect and understand, or at least have a sense on how empathetic they are. If you, and it's a tough thing to do, right? The self-reflection. But for me, the number one skill set that I look for people when I hire, especially my experience in the social sector, is empathy. Two is from an advice point of view, you know, as I said, be realistic and as you said, on salaries, on structures. Especially, I've seen people moving from the corporate sector, being disillusioned very quickly because there isn't, you know, as simple as someone who's there to book your tickets for travel when you're used to that in a corporate sector, right? The social sector by itself is known to be quite unstructured. You know, you should enjoy chaos, is my suggestion if you want to work in the social sector. So yeah, these are the two things that I would sort of reflect on. One is just really understand that empathy is an important thing to know, and just being realistic in terms of your expectation of what the social sector is.
I completely echo you, Amit. So I know I said that was the last question, but because you touched a fair bit on reflecting and planning your career, I just want to ask if there's any particular resource that you like to use, or you think it's nice to use for that purpose. And I know not everyone would need a resource to do it. Some people are just good at reflection. But is there anything that you would like to recommend to our listeners?
So, from a self-assessment, there are multiple self-assessment tests. Some of them are free as well online. Those are a good start from a self-assessment point of view. I would suggest just do some of that. Some of them helps you identify, what your strengths are, right? The other, I was going through some of the stuff on your website. I will definitely recommend Careers and Development for the content that you guys have developed. And just for everybody who's listening, I wasn't told to say anything like this, but I was impressed by the content that was developed, and I think it's useful for people. Yeah, so do self-assessment tests online. Reflect on what the scores are finding. You might not agree with it. There have been self-assessment tests that I've not agreed with, but over a course of time, you start thinking back on it and tend to say, oh, maybe that was correct. So yeah, and then do as much research and definitely check out Careers and Development.
Thanks, Amit. And since you already spoke about careers and development, I do want to mention that in our FAQ section, we have 2 videos that speak about this. So one is what things should you consider before entering the development sector, where we touch upon points like empathy that Amit, you just mentioned. And we also have our last video in that FAQ section is how can I plan my career in the development sector, where we have questions on like reflecting about what sectors you want to focus on, what kind of lifestyle you would like, so what, when, where. We focus on these questions. So, and I'm proud to see that you touched upon some of those elements that we have focused on in those videos. So we're probably going along a right path with those videos out there. So thanks for the recommendation.
Brilliant. And then just for anybody who's listening, I'm on a sabbatical right now, so I have quite a bit of free time. But I'm always happy to help out people, especially people who want to build careers in the development space. Feel free to share my LinkedIn profile. Just shoot me a message. We can set up a time to talk. I'm happy to do that.
I will. Thanks so much for offering the time to speak to people.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Amit. It's been lovely talking to you and hearing your advice. And I wish I had spoken to you before or while I was in the earlier stages of my career journey, but I'm still glad that I got this advice from you. And I'm sure our listeners would also benefit from it. Thanks a lot.
Also, and the pleasure is all mine.